It was a summer afternoon. And a few weeks before, I had resigned from my role at a very large company to start my own business. And it was really like following my passion, this fascination I've had for years on taking happiness research, learning about it, and kind of trying to teach it and apply it in daily life. And on that afternoon, I opened up my email and there was a confirmation email from a senior leader in the Army National Guard in the state of Wisconsin. Our contract was confirmed and we would do development with every single one of their battalion leadership teams focused on soldier happiness and well being. And not only that, but the fee was enough to keep me pretty comfortable for like 2 or 3 years. And I remember just feeling like, wow, like I took this leap of faith and now I'm like basically living my dream. Like I'm getting paid to do happiness research and apply it and teach about it. Like this is amazing. I'm so happy. I'm going to go out to the gas station and buy a bottle of champagne. Because I don't know, in Western Pennsylvania, we go to Sheets, okay? And that's where we go to buy champagne. And I'm like, I just want to celebrate. Like, I'm so happy. How long do you think that happiness lasted? What do you think? So I ask this a lot when I do seminars, but maybe like a year, maybe a few months. And then inevitably there's always one person who will say like, oh, maybe 30 seconds. And I'm like, you do know my whole thing is like teaching about happiness and studying. I majored in it. Like, you know that, right? So, no, some people don't have a lot of faith in me, but the truth is, that night, I was driving to dinner and this guy cut me off, almost ran me off the road. And it was as if all of that happiness that I had worked so hard to build up for the last few months and years just went right out the window. And of course, maybe it wasn't that extreme, but like, have you ever had that happen? Have you ever experienced that a little bit where you had this big goal or this big project or this big promotion or, oh, if we just get this relationship, it'll be right, or get this sales goal, it'll be right, or get this thing at work or get through this month or this project. And then what happens? Usually it's pretty nice. Right? Success is great, but it seems like it just doesn't quite last the way that we would want it to. You see, in our society, we kind of get this equation. If I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. And that's like pretty much how we manage people, how we parent, how we think about business. And the problem is, it is scientifically incorrect. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video, is the relationship between happiness and success as it relates to especially kind of like your work and your results, and like what's kind of the relationship there. And in fact, it's kind of a surprising one. And that what we find is that happiness tends to lead to success. Right? Because again, like, remember what I said, so much of the words like, I'll work harder and then I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. But again, the kind of scientific literature seems to indicate that this is the reverse. So now, if you're not familiar with my work, I'm a former startup executive, Zen monk, and operations leader. I created the world's first major in happiness, literally majored in happiness, which is a fun conversation to have with your parents, in case you were wondering. Can you imagine if your kid wanted to do that? Be like, how much is tuition again? So anyway, I went on to do research there, teach the first course on happiness at the University of Alabama, and now I run 2 companies. One works with businesses and nonprofits. The other works with military and first responders, where we take happiness research into organizations and use it to improve performance and employee experience. So everything from like a $3 million operations and safety turnaround for a trucking company to sales enablement projects, to nonprofits, to recruiting and retention and mental health in the military. Okay, that's basically what we do. So let's come back to this discussion. What is the relationship then between happiness and success? Well, scientifically speaking, remember, this is what we're talking about here. The first thing is we have to understand two psychological principles: the arrival fallacy and hedonic adaptation. The arrival fallacy is this idea that we said at the beginning. Once I just get there, then I can be happy. The problem is we tend to keep pushing that point off into the future. And that's why psychologists call it the arrival fallacy, is that, so much of our psychology, we tend to think once I get a certain benchmark or a certain achievement or a certain place in life or a certain promotion or I get married or I get whatever, then it's like I'm gonna arrive. But what we find is that most psychological satisfaction actually comes from the pursuit, from the progress, and not from the arrival. And in many cases, the moment you arrive, you set a new goal. And that is intertwined with that other psychological principle I just mentioned, hedonic adaptation. This is a bit of a problem being a human being. It's that the good things wear out. And you can kind of understand how this probably evolved in terms of our ancestors and our psychology, because you might have had these people way back when that went out and they went for a hunt and they killed this big woolly mammoth, and so they literally had a mammoth amount of food, and they said, "Oh, this is so good. It tastes so good. I'm just going to enjoy this, and we've arrived. We did it. We never have to hunt again." Those people did not pass on their genes so much. You know who did? The super neurotic, anxious cave people who said, "I know we have this huge woolly mammoth, but all I can think about is the next one." And, "Oh, that first bite is so good. Oh, that second bite's pretty good. I'm getting full. And now it's not doing so much for me. I need to move on to something else." And so the arrival fallacy and hedonic adaptation, in both cases, it kind of probably developed to help keep us alive. Right, to help us keep seeking that next meal, that next source of water, that next resource, that next mate. Okay, and so you got to understand this. The brain is really good for keeping you alive, not always so good at keeping you happy. So then what is the relationship between happiness and success? And I want to be careful to say that I'm not saying success is bad or success won't bring some happiness. If you go get your dream job, or you go make $1 million, or you bench press 300 pounds, like a lot of times that meaningful achievement and the pursuit of goals does bring happiness. As we say, it's just we kind of know it's not enough. And what's more interesting is there's actually a bit of a paradoxical or perhaps inverse relationship here. That time and time again in the psychological literature, we see that happiness, let's think of it as positive mood and positive perspective, that those two things actually predict a greater likelihood of success. So this idea of I'm just going to work harder to be more successful, to be happier, it may actually be that if you work harder on your happiness and you get to be happier, then you'll be more successful. And if you don't believe me, that's great. I'd be skeptical too. I'm going to talk to you about some research, okay? Let's start with productivity. So about 2-3 years ago, Oxford University published a study that found that happy workers are 13% more productive. Even when they work the same amount of hours, they achieve more results and more tasks in the same amount of time. Similar lines, we can think about productivity, but we also think about sales and revenue generation. So this is a really cool study from the University of Pennsylvania. I think this was in like the 90s, maybe the 80s. It was at MetLife. MetLife Insurance was hiring like 5,000 salespeople per year, and about 50% of them quit within the first year. So they brought in Dr. Marty Seligman. He's an expert in optimism. So remember, happiness, we can think of like positive mood, moment to moment, but also a positive perspective, like you're optimistic about the future. And so he started assessing people they were hiring. And what you find is that after 2 years, people who pass his optimism assessment outsold those who did not by about 35%. But what's even crazier, he convinced MetLife to hire these people who are like super optimists, like super happy people. And you can maybe imagine these people. These are people who failed, like they literally failed the skills and aptitude test, but they scored like super duper high in the happiness. So these are like people who are like, yeah, kind of clueless. I have no idea what I'm doing, but like, hey, this is going to be great. Let's do it. Maybe better in sales. If that was like you're hiring for maybe your IT department or your accounting, maybe not so much. But these people, listen to this. These people outsold by over 50% over 2 years. Massive. So in sales, productivity, there's even a paper by a guy, an economist with the last name Como, C-O-M. You'll have to forgive me, I don't remember his first name. In the Park Place Economist, who found that, again, people with that more of that positive perspective when it comes to happiness early in their careers earn more money over the course of their careers. How about creativity and problem solving? So I can actually invite you to step into the laboratory with me right here. All right. You have a candle. You have a lighter. And you have a box of thumbtacks. So this is an experiment by a psychologist, Carl Dunker. And it goes like this. How do you create a scenario in which you use these ingredients to create almost like a lantern or suspend the candle off the ground so it's not dripping wax on anything? You with me? So imagine, like, you might say, oh, well, I'm just going to hold it in my hand and light it. Well, then it's going to drip on your hand and drip on the floor. You'd be like, oh, I'm going to set it on something. Well, then it's going to drip on the floor. Some people even get kind of creative and they try to pin the candle to the wall, but it turns out that doesn't work. And maybe I'll give you a hint here. Out of the box thinking, think outside the box. That's where this comes from. Well, the reason I tell you about this study is because when people are primed, okay, so they're like a little bit emotionally manipulated in the laboratory to be in a more positive mood. That was a little over the top. Positive mood. Well, it turns out they actually solve this problem in less time. And so the way you solve it, it has to do with a way of assessing creativity, which is you have a more expansive perspective and you overcome what is called functional fixedness. And that means it's easy to just think of this box of tacks as a box to hold the tacks, but it turns out if you empty it, you can put the candle in there, light it, but then you actually can use these to pin the box to the wall and basically create a little mount for the candle. So when people are in a good mood, they solve that problem in far less time. You can also think about this for some other really complex problems. They've taken physicians, medical doctors, into the lab and done the same thing. Get them in a good mood, get them in a more negative or neutral mood. And same thing, they give them a case, solve a case for a patient, and they solve it about 20% faster when they're in a good mood with fewer cognitive distortions. So we see, again, creativity and problem solving associated with positive mood. You even see health. So in 2003, I do not know how they got people to sign up for this, but they called people up and said, hey, I want you to come down to the laboratory and we're going to shoot some cold virus up your nose and see how sick you get. So I'm like, who are they calling for this study? Do they say like, hey, Jackson, you got anything going on this Saturday? We were just going to, spray some virus up your nose, see how sick you get. And you're like, well, I was thinking about going to dinner, but I don't know if I have any other better plans. But they somehow got people to do this. And what they found is that people who had more positive emotional experience or more positive emotional tendencies, I should say, going into that exposure had a more robust immune response and fewer symptoms of the cold virus. And this, going back to what I said earlier about earnings and sales and productivity, one of the reasons why happier people tend to do better in their career and their earnings is because they take fewer sick days. And then finally, we have really interesting data that I learned about at the Happiness and Leadership Lab at Harvard, talking to their team, and they shared this at their last symposium, I believe in 2024. Irrational Capital, and is an investment research firm that uses their own data sets to create these kind of funds that benchmark companies with higher employee happiness and well-being. One of them, if you want to look it up, is Happy, HAPI, and it has outperformed both the Russell 2000 and the S&P 500 to date. So this kind of echoes prior research from some other companies like Gallup, another large study which looked at a bunch of Indeed data on employee experience that tends to find companies that have a better employee experience, better culture, that sense of kind of engagement and commitment, all of these things that are kind of supportive of happiness at work, even at the level of large publicly traded organizations, we see that same connection. Happiness leads to success. So what I encourage you to think about is maybe like this kind of surprising science here in this business case, which suggests, yeah, success is wonderful, but maybe it's not so much, I'm just going to work harder, be more successful, and then finally I'll get to be happier. I suggest you work hard, yes, but work hard on your happiness. Your physical health, your mental health, and your relationships. Exercise, eat well, get plenty of sleep so that you have physical health. Cultivate positive thoughts and emotions. Practice mindfulness so that you learn to be where your feet are, so that you have good mental health. And invest in your relationships, which are life's most important asset, so you have good relational health, and you will be happier. And then you'll actually just be more successful. Okay? So thank you for watching. As always on this channel, we try to share practical tools and research for the art and science of happiness. This has been Jackson Kirchis. Thank you. I'll see you next time.